sitting with us as a host of our very own Eileen Tilmalu, all the way down from Hawaii. Tonight, by popular demand, we are revisiting a powerful and controversial topic, Fa'alave'lave, and its deeper ties to our Polynesian culture. So tonight, we're bringing back to the hot seat our very own host, Tasi Taufa'asau Arlington, to dive into a deeper um, to dive even deeper into the subject, answering your questions and sharing insights from Dr. Augustin Kramer's historic work known as the Samoa Islands. So, without further ado, welcome back to the hot seat, Arlington. What's up? What's up? What's up?
Yeah,
Yes, brother, welcome.
thank you guys. Always a pleasure to join you on your podcast. Ready to share some more stories with you guys.
So, welcome back again, Arlington. Since your last hot seat, what's new in your world today?
Yeah, I've been busy with my daughter Talia's Polynesian pageant slash indigenous pageant. But since the last podcast, yeah, I've been doing a lot of reviews and reading all the comments from the last segment we did. And interestingly, I never had TikTok, so you guys told me I was looking on Facebook and it didn't seem like there's too much traction. But you said, no, you're on the wrong site. It's very chaotic on TikTok. And I said, I don't have TikTok. So I had to jump on my daughter's TikTok and I'm got over there. I'm like, geez. So I started my TikTok and so that's where I'm at. I've been busy on TikTok, been releasing some of my own videos on Fasamoa topics. So that's been my latest and greatest.
And I noticed too, like you saw how there was a lot of, well, let me just first start by since our last or the first podcast we did with you, as soon as we posted the Fa Love It one, which was very surprising for us, we hit about to this currently we got about 388,000 views on Facebook and about on TikTok we had about 3,000 likes, 200 something comments, and it just blew up. And so having you on again as has been a very great demand because there's a lot of questions that needs to be answered. And so I think one of the biggest question is, and for those of us who don't understand Fa'anabe, can you tell us what Fa'anabe means to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways you can describe it, but like for me, just trying to, if you break down the word itself, I always think of it as like how they say if you're walking through the bushes and you're carrying something, and there's always a term walaveia, right? Something that grabs onto you or interrupts you or disrupts you from what you normally would do. So that's how I would say falablave would be something that interrupts you, right? Because it's not always a bad thing. Love is are meant to be good, but it's that interruption that you know that it's going to cause some pain to you, which pain in your contribution, right? Because you're going to have to support this event depending on how much you contribute. So that's kind of a long way around trying to describe what a love is. Well, at least the meaning of the love.
Mhm.
Love. Mm-hmm.
So you kind of touched a little bit. It's a blessing, it's a burden, it could be both. Um, do you think for those who are not understanding the blessing part of it, do you think it's something that we're probably going to lose because of the difference of both having it as a blessing and as a burden?
Lovers are a great thing. Um, like all the support that you gain from those who support it. So it's not a bad thing, right? Lovers are the collection, the input of the masses. The more people that put in, whether it's if you put only 10% of your effort, but there's more people putting into it, that's the benefit of it. But it's when how would I say this? Let's say if it's my funeral, right? If it's a funeral that falls on my family or a wedding that falls on my family alone should take ownership of it. You, as a first cousin, I should not expect you to contribute so heavily on an event that falls on me. But a lot of Samoa families feel that they are the extension 2 or 3 levels far away from the immediate family, and they feel, oh, I have to give so much to be, equally for that event. But you have to remember, you have to step back and say, or so you have to take ownership. For example, my mom, when my mom passed, it was always known. The family would say, you know, Arlington, you and your brothers and sisters, that is your falavelave. So the expectation is you'll get more assistance from the outside, but it's not meant for you to solely rely on this, everyone else's outside of your brothers and sisters to take care of that. So I think that's kind of where we are with Falab Love is you own that Falab Love. And I think last week was a good segment that we had was the importance of insurances. Life insurance is what
Yeah.
will take care of that Falab Love almost 100%. Now the rest of it will be like a very small burden left over to your immediate family. So did I capture that for you guys?
You did. Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
definitely.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, do you think that the reason why family decides to chip in to help out is because they feel like, well, if I'm going to help out, if I'm going to help out with their event now or with any funeral expenses, I expect them to do the same thing with our family when that time comes.
Yes. I mean, our Samoan community is based on reciprocity, right? We reciprocate what we give out, and then in the long term, we expect something to give in. So the way I look at it is everyone that contributed to my mom's funeral, it's what keeps me motivated to all those, folks who are impacted later on past my mom's funeral. So I remember those people who gave money, and then I say, okay, how can I sit idle and not give back to that family that gave something to my mom, or that family who also contributed to my mom's funeral? So that's what's so unique about our culture is to recognize those who brought something in, and then when it's your turn to repay them, make sure you rally everyone, within your brothers and sisters to return the favor. So if you hear anyone that says, oh, we want to sit out, we don't want to do that one, you remind them, hey, that person over there or that family over there, the ones that, showed that love to your mom, they gave in to your mom's funeral. So, I mean, you give back. But again, like my stance on this is give what you can to give back. But just because that family brought 5,000, it doesn't mean you have to go and return 5,000 back, right? You and your family have to understand what is it best financially for your family to give back to that family that's in mourning, right? So we don't say, oh, because they gave us 5,000, let's make sure we get 5,000 back. There's no logic in that. You give
Mhm.
what you can. So only polong ay, your own family, because it's not equal. You don't know if that family is way wealthier than you are, your family, and now you're trying to return a favor that you're not even capable of. And then now what are you doing? You're going and borrowing money out of loans. Now your family is struggling, they're not eating. So that's where the Samoa part gets mixed up in this. So you got to be very careful on how you manage these things.
I have to ask, have you ever seen or witnessed the division or tension caused by fa'alave? I'm sure we all have, but in your experience, have you witnessed any of that?
Yeah, there's so many different ways of thought. I think the division it comes into play if you go with the mindset of let's just, I call it reckless planning, where you just say, if you mellow, you don't even like care about how much was brought in. Like if you don't have a budget, if you don't have a budget to begin with, how do you know how much you can afford, right?
Mm.
So most people will just say, let's just keep go buying more things so we can take care of, all these families that are coming in. or all the pastors and other matais that are coming in, you don't even know your limitation if you're not properly budgeting. Like I would start with where are all the funeral expenses, pay off all the funeral home, pay off the first and foremost. Like I always talk about funerals because that's like the most you
Yeah.
know painful process because I've been through it. My mom's funeral alone, and I'm sharing this because I want people to understand just the funeral home and the cemetery alone, the package that we got for our mom was like the best that we could give a respectable funeral. Came out to almost 19 grand. And this was Las Vegas, 19 grand. I'm not talking about pafanga, like feeding the families afterwards. Everything else, that's not even included in the 19 grand. So if you think about it, it can be very, very expensive. And which is why we always go back to our life insurance. It's critical to have that to supplement, take off that big burden.
Arlington, did you guys have life insurance for your mom?
Yeah. So we did have life insurance. The problem we had into we had to renew my mom's life insurance. We were in year two of the renewal. We didn't really it matured in 2 years. So which meant by the time my mom passed, she was in month 11, I believe, which meant she was not going to get the full. I think it was a 20,000 policy or something like that. So you really didn't get the full benefit of the policy. So which means you get what they gave you, and then you eat the rest of the cost.
Switching gears on the Fat Lavi Lavi. Well, not really switching gears, but I have to ask because there was a question I kind of thought about why everybody had to chip in for Fat Lavi Lavi. Does that have to do with the land that you live on, family tribes that you have to contribute because you are part of the family, you live on that land. If you don't do your part, you pretty much are going to get kicked off of the tribal land.
So in Samoa, a lot of the land is communal land, which means so long which means you're still serving your sao, you're still serving your family, still serving your village. The law protects you because the Matai has no authority to kick you off so long as they'll ask you in court. If you're the Matai of the family and you want to remove someone, they will grant you that authority to remove them if they're not serving you anymore, even if you're blood. So they'll say, are you working the land? Are you contributing to your family? And so long as the answer is right, then you can't get kicked off. So I think that's where to answer your question, yeah, it's tied to how much you contribute to your family. You can't just live freely without. I mean, that's still the fasa mo way. Yung ay kiko kuot koing, right?
Mhm.
So what are you bringing to the family? Whether it's regular work or alwe famamalo, mga, all that kind of stuff. That's still contribution to your family.
Which leads me to another question. Where do you see Fa'anavilavi empowering our people?
I kind of lost you guys there for a second.
Okay. Where do you see Fa'anavilavi empowering our people?
Yeah, Farab Love are great because it's a way for you to extend that knowledge of your family, which means like it's always like a family reunion when you go to Farab Love. I mean, as painful as they are, by the time you get there, you say, "Oh, I haven't seen you so long." But that's the beauty of it is those who embrace supporting each other. You haven't seen them in years, and I'll give you an example. My aunt Sila died recently. She belongs to our Lopa family, and our family from Lopa family is from Vailoa, and I haven't seen them in a long time. So even though we met on sad terms, but it was a good time to find all your distant relatives, and then you get to introduce your daughter, like my daughter, and then I'm introducing her to her cousins about the same age. But that's where you teach the next generation. This is where it starts. You guys are ones that are carrying the torch and carrying on our cultural and traditions. Watch what we do. These are your relatives. Continue this practice. But I think that's what strengthens the bond of the Fasamoa. And how do you pass that down is take your kids to these Falavalaves. They may not understand it, but then at least they know
Mm-hmm.
who their relatives are. Young because now you get to understand, oh, so that's the low boss side that, and then you say, oh, okay, who are those? That's our Taufa'asau side. So Falablabas are a good area where you know the true love that you get from distant families, right? You start asking, the other people, "Oy, ang nga kaya ng mo mo?" And they start explaining to you, oh, that's grandpa or great grandpa so and so. It's amazing like how deep of a generation people will be there, and you're like asking, why does that person support us when they are like five cousins or distance away from us? But that's the beauty of maintaining our fasa mo loves.
So, Renita, you married someone outside of our culture. You married a
Hmm.
beautiful Native American. I know a lot of my friends who married outside of our culture have talked about the difficulties of making their spouse understand fa'alavilave. How was that in your relationship with you and your wife?
Yeah, part of it is embracing their culture as well. So for me, I did everything to support my wife's Native American culture. I also contributed to her family, by working just the work we do, sharing my income with the family, buying all their groceries. So they're looking at me as someone that's contributing to not only their family, but then attending my wife's powwows, right? So to them, powwows are a significant event to the Native American culture. I embrace that. I even dance in their ceremonies. So for them to see like, oh, he's taking time to learn our culture. And I think my wife looking at me embracing that in return, how can she not embrace our Fasa way? So it's a tag team thing. What I do for their family, my wife also does for our family. So it's worked out just fine for us. And that's why the way we raised our daughter is you go and do your Fasa stuff, and then you also go do your Native American stuff. Yeah.
So, even with those who are outside of the culture and those who are part of our culture, one of the things that's confusing for even for myself is trying to understand how the Matthias church leaders play a part in receiving money when it comes to Whānau. What is your intake on that?
So the Samoan people have this belief that God will punish me if I do not acknowledge the man of God or the woman of God that's in my presence. And that's how it used to be, growing up in the 90s, under what I've observed in my dad's Lokaiki. And then slowly there was a transition where, oh, we got to acknowledge all Awa'os now, right? So now everyone's getting the envelope, for Awa'os. And then over time, it's now Ki'akongos are now getting envelopes. I don't remember in a too far distant past where Elakue Farab there's 50 Awa'os combined with Faife and all of a sudden everyone gets an envelope. So where I disagree on is if you only look at the funeral, right? If you only look at the funeral, right? The funeral part is over with. How, like, if you were to put a budget and say how much is put aside for only envelopes, right? Only envelopes for everyone that's present. And I asked this to anyone out there that is viewing the same question.
Mhm.
take a wild guess of how much that you're putting aside. E keu umaya kaya le sau fai mai, le go fa senga. Does it really make sense for us? Let's just throw a $10,000 out there. Does it make sense for us? Our funeral is truly over. Does it really make sense for us to now expend another 10, 20,000 to put across to everyone that's in attendance? If you look at it we always say a 30,000-foot view, you are paying people to attend your funeral. And the question is, right? So, that's the question I ask. Does it really make sense for you to, donate all that money out? But then where does that money come from? That's the question. Where does that $30,000 come from? It comes from the hardworking individual families that put that money into there. So I leave that up to each individual families to tackle that question. If it sits well with your family to release $20,000, $30,000 post burial, and now you're just doing what you call fasamoa. If that's okay with you, then that's up to you. But for me, it doesn't sit well with me knowing that the main event has passed, and now we're just paying everyone across the board um, up to $20,000, $30,000, depending on who is participating in that event.
I have to ask about how things have changed from what I remember growing up in Malailoa in Samoa, where we've talked about this before, touched base on it, where back then, remember, we would use coconut with the dollar up top. And I'm not sure Western Samoa is still doing this, but then we've changed that to add more valuable stuff to leasing out during the funeral. Um, why did it change? Is it because we have become more Americanized with material things, and we've done away with the iakoma?
So it sounds like you're referring to the like the SUA part, right?
Yes.
So yes, initially we all understood it. It started with the coconut. I think over time, you know, in the 1980s, I remember in San Francisco they would do maybe one soda can because they didn't really have coconuts. And then going to Samoa was still new, and then eventually they replaced it with the soda can. And then over time, I remember they replaced it with the 3 liter, and then more modernized. Last thing I think I seen was it's now a champagne bottle. But the question we ask is, o le mea e malama ka kou le mafuaanga, o le sua, right? A whapea o le sua nga, that first part of the sua, o le mea e kalilo more, it's for greeting and as you've just arrived. The first part of the sua is for you to sit and eat and for us to fellowship while they're preparing the bigger stuff. But that's the true meaning of the first part of the sua. So does it really make sense to you for you to change things to a soda, to a 3 liter, to a champagne bottle? Does it make sense for you to offer a champagne bottle to someone that's sitting across from you and expect that person to drink a champagne bottle in your presence, and that's for his consumption during a short period of time for you to interact? It doesn't make sense to me, but then, like I said, things change based on people's practice. If you don't understand the origins of that event, but you wanted to elevate it each time you see, so, let's do it better than the last time. Let's just keep making it better. Koe fo'i, le amakanga, le winga mongi, this event. Does it make sense that we're now went from new. Fast forward all the way to today is champagne bottle. I don't know where we're at today past the champagne bottle. It could be something greater than that. We're losing the meaning of our culture because we're elevating it because we don't understand the origin. And the more we keep removing it, and in not too far distance from now, we're gonna have like a whole case of soda sitting there because we think that's better than the champagne bottle. Now we've just totally removed the true meaning of this event. So
And I think we've moved towards more modernizing it, right? Versus um, you know, going back to the coconut champagne. But I mean, I think some villages still practiced, uh, using the coconut. I mean, there's some who cannot afford, using a soda and or have dollar bills. But I mean, I think for each family, it's to its own and how they do their own suo and if it's okay within their family.
that's a good point. But the other part that I know, at least the way I grew up with, and I still do it today when I go with my dad, is when they bring that first part out, right? They give, okay, here's your suo. What does your dad tell you? First thing my dad says, like to me, at least when I was growing up, taking care of my dad, the first thing my dad says, "Ave meanga ave ka vale." We've lost the value of this event because what was meant for you to partake in and eat at that moment while you're fellowshipping with the people, you're not even eating. And they almost feel ashamed to, like, I don't recall anyone eating that first part. They'll just get it and it feels like it's taboo to eat at that moment, and they'll just remove that
Mm,
stuff and take it straight to the car. I know every time it's always, it comes here, they put it to the side, and I have to move that quick, move it out to the car. So for those who are preparing the funeral, they just think about that event. It's beautiful that you've done all that. You spend so much money on it, but how much
mm,
value did that person put into it that receives it? It's not that they're not grateful, but it almost feels like you've wasted a lot of money into that event when that person just gets it and just takes it to the car. That's just my perspective, and I would like to hear others and what they feel about it.
Yeah, so for all of you who are tuning in, if you have any questions or any comments, thoughts, any of your opinions that you want to share, go ahead and drop it down in the inbox for us to read. So we're going to switch gears because I want you to start talking about this book that so many of us are familiar with, and I think it's going to surprise a lot of people once we start diving into it. So exactly as the Samoa Islands by Dr. Augustin Kramer. Please explain to us what that is.
Yeah. Um, Early on in the 1800s, towards the end of before the three islands of Samoa were separated and belonged to Germany and the United States and Great Britain. So towards the end, around 1890s, a German, I think I call him scientist, but he's like a naturalist. He came to study the flora and fauna in Samoa, so he wanted to document like what type of plant species and what type of animals are in this island that we're discovering in the Pacific. Because all the Pacific islands were kind of new to the modern world, so
mm,
they're also seeking new plants for medicine. Maybe there's some new medicinal value that they can learn. So that was his original job as he was going from island to island. But he also noticed, during his work, because he did work on other islands, he didn't like what he's seen were done by the other expeditions. Not
Wait,
only
listen, before you continue, can you just
yeah,
let us, I don't know if you mentioned it, do you let everyone know what time frame we're talking about?
yeah, the we're talking about 1890s, 1880s, 1890, close to 1900. Yeah. So if you remember, Samoa was fairly discovered by the missionaries around 1830s. The
mm,
the so everything is still fairly new. So even 1880s, the progress in our education and in writing was still very, new to them, and a lot of it had been slowed down by. Remember that there was a lot of wars trying to stabilize, who was going to be king of Samoa. And when we talk about Samoa, Kukuila used to belong to, for most of it, it was under Upolu. So a lot of wars were still going on, but then you still had the people like Kramer who were doing these work. They were studying um, the plants and the animals. But then what Kramer did was he didn't like how the other missionaries and scientists were just going through each island and implementing the Western way, converting people away from their original culture, saying this is bad, abandon those ways. He wanted Samoa to be untouched. He wanted to leave that in place. So he interviewed. He went to island to island to island, and he went and interviewed as many chiefs that wanted to sit down with him and write their story. And so he painstakingly wrote down the Falupengas. He'll sit down. Let's for example, he went to Vailoa or the district and say, okay, tell me about the district of Vailoa. Where does Vailoa fall under? And they'll say, Vailoa falls under Kualakai. Here are the other villages that belong to Kualakai. So he's now like organizing the things, and you'll find in his book, he'll say Kualakai, Kualauka, Alataua. He did all that breakdown of what villages belong to what district in each island. So not only that, he's also capturing the Falupengas for each village.
Arlington,
And
um, for
mhm,
those who don't know what fa'anupenga is, can you tell us what that means?
sure, the Falupenga are the honors to each village, and part of it is capturing the historical significance of that village or that district, and it ties to like if that village or district won a war, like and some of that is also captured in our stories, what battles they won. So that is now captured in these stories which we call Falupenga. So your village will speak of the honors, and these are like things that your village is proud of. These are your war stories or significant events that your your village had overcome in our pre-Christianity times. So a
The
lot of
the
that is
unique part
captured.
about, sorry, the part about what you're talking about, the reason why it's so unique is because this is something that had not been written down. Our culture has been all oral interpreted, right? So what you're describing is the fact that um, Kramer came in to talk to all those during that time frame because to get information down so it can be written and have in writing, right?
Yes. Correct. Just like you've stated, there is an oral tradition of me masangiga ko o upu ku mai, the previous generation. So it's important that for us to pass on those stories verbally, to our younger ones, and repetitively get it ingrained in their head, and that gets passed on. But as these Westerners came in, they now captured it in writing. So you now have a written version, but then the oral tradition is still ongoing, right? So it's not like the people didn't pass it down, who kept it in their villages or within their families. So now you have a written version that exists, but then you also have the oral tradition. So if you listen to the villages, you have some people in Samoa, even to this day, that will challenge the written version because they'll say, "Ile loga ko po ile makai nga lang lang interview with Kramer. He may have given his version, but this is the true version right here. So how do we know which one is true? The one that the village maintains and the one the families maintain versus the one that Kramer has. So my answer to that is just keep an open thought to both of them.
Mm.
Don't throw one way over the other, but at least you still have a reference point, that Kramer You know, so let's say, a Matai, another Matai wrote that down. It's still valuable for us to acknowledge, that Matai that gave that story. But then,
Yeah.
to combine them collectively and just say, okay, there's some differences in between, but then that's why you visit with your village and district and say, what do we agree upon that we can accept, between these two versions?
Mm.
Did we capture the Falupenga part?
We did. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, okay, so within his books, and then one person mentioned he went from plants to family tree. Yeah, pretty much he did. And I know Arlington is gonna jump into that as well, because there's so much that he has saved. Arlington, go ahead. I know you wanted to say something.
Okay. So if there's a question about family tree, so like I mentioned in one of my TikTok videos is "Ye ngafa o ainga," but then I didn't go as too far as to say ngafa o ainga, like ainga o kupu, or what we think are the high families. So not every family, sorry about that. If you go and looking, and like for even our family, Tasi Taufa'asau, you won't find that. But if you have the larger families, the Malietoas, the Kuimanguas, like even my other family, the Ngaokioke family, I won't speak on those specific names, but I'm just mentioning like the larger names that we're familiar with. It's in these books. Um, Even like my mom's side, the Kofasau family, it's also in this book. So um, those are the families that was captured by Kramer. Now the argument is, you leave it to the families. Like for me, the way I would say it is, I know what my family is tracking, and then I also go to what Kramer was tracking. And so now I try to merge what my family says and what Kramer says. And then I always take the books back to my family and I say, who is this that Kramer references? You know, what family is this? And I'm always looking on, these reunion sites that we go to, and I'm trying to acknowledge all the families and I'm making all these ties. So that's how I use it. So if you ever get a copy of Kramer's book, I encourage you to do the same. I'm not saying that Kramer was right and his work is gospel that we 100% say "Isa ola nga fa Kramer si umo nga fa inga." No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's an interesting perspective to look through these names. It shines light to an area that a lot of us may have not looked into.
Arlington, what is Talofa vowel? Why is it important?
So the Kalavavau are stories that are passed down, that are captured like all the way back in history. And I'll give you an example. One of them that I like that's also in this book is, how did the tattoos arrive to Samoa? Now Kramer clearly writes, the artwork was brought in by two girls, and he says it's brought from Fiji, right? The argument today that you see online, the Samoans will defend, it's a circle from a kalanga o fiki, it's not fiki Fiji, or fiki uko i mangua. So to me, it's still worth listening to both sides. You can take the argument it's Fiji, and you can also take the argument it's Fikiuka, but it's not very clear which one it is. But that's kind of one example of the Kalalavau that you find in here. The other importance of the Kalalavau is when it's important to the Matais, because when Matais speak in it's almost like code, right? They speak in a different language. They speak in metaphors. Um, to equate that in English, it's something similar to Haile. Also, the sky is blue and the mountains are green, right? So those stories are generated from these stories, the Kalaravau. So they'll, what we call alanga upus, are contained in these stories. That's why people always say, "Do you have those books? Do you have Eso Kusi Kalaravau?" Because people not only have the Alanga Opu, they're careful to use the Alanga Opu because they need to go back to the story itself to understand how that phrase, what was the origin of the phrase, by reading the story. So if you don't understand the story and the meaning behind the genesis of that statement, you may use a phrase that was meant for a funeral and you may use it in a wedding ceremony, and or vice versa. So you can offend a lot of people by doing so.
Mm. I wanted to know in regards to Kramer's work, was most of his work done in American Samoa or was it done in all Samoan islands?
Yeah, Kramer does acknowledge. So when he started his work, Thomas Powell also did work prior to him. So Thomas Powell initiated the work. He also tried to capture the Falupengas as well. But when Kramer did his work, he said, I want to visit all the islands, but I want to work independently and not really use Thomas Powell's work as like I don't want to just plagiarize his work, but I want to do my work, but then also use his work to supplement my understanding if there's any gaps in what I wrote. So he visited American Samoa, he visited Upolu, but the one that he had a lot of challenges with was Mangua. He acknowledges that the Mangua people did not want to share their stories. He went there and they just said no, and they warned him. Do you know these stories? When it's shared to ears that shouldn't be, uh, these stories are meant for. It's like bad things will likely happen to you because these stories are meant for the Mangua people. That's why it also brings bad. It's not karma, but you're bringing bad juju on even the person who shared it. So even those chiefs were wise enough, like I'm not gonna be the one that's gonna share the story with this guy, because this is meant only for Mangua people. So he struggled with that. Like he couldn't even get the Mangua people to share their stories, and it was one area where he felt like, oh, I wish I had more understanding of the Mangua stories. But interestingly, he gets to Polu. I think there's two chiefs that end up visiting Mangua. I mean, visiting Upolu from Mangua. The thing with Kramer was also a doctor who also treated people, of their illnesses. So this is where people criticize Kramer's work is because he didn't want to treat them unless they shared their stories, right? So the question that Samoan people always say is, "Pole mea wo pepelongia, makai Samoa ya Kramer," in order for them to get treatment from him. So, are there any stories that they shared with Kramer just to get him to hurry up and treat them? But not like those stories weren't even true, but it was just to get them their treatment. So that's kind of like an interesting perspective of how much of Kramer's work can we trust, or
Hmm.
but how much of the work, um, because Kramer's work is almost similar to Margaret Reed, right?
I was just gonna
I
So
was
mention that
just
she's
about,
part.
yeah.
Yeah.
so you got to be careful of like how much do you trust in this. Olea o ngā lo sa ili, different books, different research, and listen to different opinions and compare all your studies and just ask others. Do we now trust this segment right here, or can we pass it off as something that he created on his own? So we leave that out to the Samoan community to decide. We have a lot of researchers out there, and they've done a lot of work on this.
I
You
feel
know,
like, okay,
okay.
this is a side note. Sorry. I feel like Kramer and Margaret Mead, if they got with the translator back then, right? It's just a good old water cooler, someone fangongo, right? Sit around and
Yeah.
just be like, hey, faya kako poka in that way, amay palanilla se kako kupe, or like, something so that they can, you know, or in that case, get more treatment, right? But Margaret Mead, That's a controversial Arthur there.
And that's the danger of once it's written, because if no one else was writing an equal book to parallel this writing, you have the tendency to accept one as gospel because one is
Right.
written, and then everyone else says that has to be the one we follow. So
Mm,
yeah,
And it also goes back to like what you mentioned about the family lines. How much can you trust the family lines that they're talking about? Because he's only went to one section of people and not everyone, and it hasn't been going back on the book, right? Has it ever been what's that word where they someone checks it to confirm that everything that was written is true based off of their own knowledge and their understanding
yeah.
of their time frame?
So the University of Bolu, they have I encourage people to listen to their podcast. It's very interesting. It's Samoa Islands. They've done
Mhm.
extensive research on almost every topic there is. Not only just research, they've done field work. So if there's a story in there, they'll go and visit Mangua, like, the Kai Sama Sama. Like all these things, they've even visited Kukuila, just trying to retrack the path Kaima, Kilifainga took. So they've done a lot of work. So I like listening to their studies, and it's very encouraging to listen to the work, the questions that you have that you ask in your brain, that if you're leaning on one side or the other, those guys have had that same question. But not only did they have that question in mind, they actually went and did field work. So it answers a lot of questions, but then they also say, we did our research and here's our finding, but we will never take away um, a different opinion or a different version of a story. We'll always keep alive and respect the different versions that exist out there. And that's how I encourage others is, if you hear anything that you hear today, don't take it for gospel that, my way is the only way. Because I acknowledge all the million different versions that are told in Samoa. You have to acknowledge those and not dismiss them and say, oh, you know, you can't say that, right? You have to acknowledge, oh, that's interesting. You have to say, oh, I like that version. I like how that story it's an interesting way how that one was explained. So, but I want to go back to what you had asked earlier about, like, how is Kramer's work being acknowledged in Samoa and the land?
Mhm.
So, how would you use Kramer's work if you were to stumble on the family trees and now you're trying to acknowledge, like, how do you cross reference with your own family? So, the work that I've done is, and here's another site that I would encourage you guys to look into, at least in American Samoa, it's called American Samoa Bar Association. American Samoa Bar Association. So, that has all the legal cases in Samoa starting in 1900. You will go in there and you'll type in your family's name in American Samoa Bar Association. Type in your family name, and it'll pull up any case related to your family. And what I found is, if there was any event that my family was involved in, and they were, you will find, like, there are stories of my family that I found. They were now five different families in a court case. The court is saying, "Oi, from Kalamilo ngafa, like, you tell me your ngafa," and then the next person explained his ngafa. So now I have like four different versions of our family ngafa that is told by different competing people who were registering for a title. Now I have this reference, right? Because you're trying to piece together your family tree, but now you have a valuable piece of information, maybe from the 1920s and 1930s, that didn't exist today. So now I have this information I can take and compare to Kramer's. And the reason why I say that is there are people today, for example, like you, Lea. So let's say you went to register a title under some family, and they'll say, okay, what family do you come from? And then they're asking you to explain where your lineage come from. And then they'll go to Kramer's book because I know American Samoa does this. They'll go to Kramer's book and they say, "Sorry, Lasso, your clan that you mentioned, it's not referenced in Kramer's book, so
Wow.
we can't acknowledge your request for this Matai title because it doesn't show your tied to this family because your name is not the name that you reference is not tied to any of the names that are in this book. So they do use Kramer's on the ngafas that are in Kramer's book.
Wow. And that's why his book is so important because it really was a start of when we started to get our pretty much our culture written down. Besides family, did he talk about like the wars that were going on within families and within the islands during that time?
I think he mentions it briefly, but like you have to extend your research into like if you're wanting to supplement Kramer's work, you also have to look into the works that were done by the missionaries. The missionaries will have the intimate details of the wars that you don't really hear about that most people capture, and you'll see the missionaries also say we fought side by side with this family, but it's not mentioned too much in Kramer's work. Kramer usually captures like the other thing unique about Kramer that he mentions is the medicine, and I think what's unique about that section in Kramer's book is these different plants, these different Samoa plants, and the different diseases and illnesses that we have in Samoa. The question I have today is, o le mea o whaonga e lava ka koe ia vai fofo ia, right? O vai the plants. Because I remember growing up, I remember, they'll say, alu e kau me se lau la aula, and then you alu, e kui ue, pe olo olo, and then either you drink it or you put it on your skin. We had, we had, we had our own medicine to treat ourselves, but at some point we abandoned our own medicinal treatments and we solely relied on Western medicine. But the question you go back to if you're reading Kramer's book and it's very interesting, like, oh, what's this plant? What is this plant? It says it cures fever, it cures, headaches, it cures, stomach aches. And I sat down with my dad and I started reading out all these plants. I said, man, all those years in Samoa, I never heard of this plant. What is this plant? And my
Mm.
dad would say, oh, yeah, that's this plant. And then I said, okay. But I said, do you remember, at your age, Dad, do you remember using these plants? He said, yeah, that was commonly used. And he always like remembers that. And I said, well, so why did the Samoan people abandon these? And he just says, just over time, it was just easy to go to the hospital. People depending on, modern treatment, and over time, we just forget about our Samoan treatment.
You know, that's kind of like food, right? Like with our plants and having to go to the plant to the manga to get our own food. I think us growing up, because I remember having to go to a plantation with my sisters to go get the food for the umu the next day, right? And I kind of see that deteriorate as we got older, especially when McDonald's came up, um, which is terrible. But anyways, I want to read a comment that just popped up. Manukians are very protective of their tribal knowledge via storytelling to foreigners. However, as long as you can share your Ngafa lineage and family clan linked to the Manuka Islands, residents will be likely to embrace and share.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And it's a good point to mention. A lot of folks, if you haven't bought Fofo Sunia's book, I think Fofo has done a great job in sharing a lot of the Mangua stories. You know, Fofo, of course, we all know is from the Mangua Islands, and it's good to read all those stories. So, I've invested a lot of time wanting to read about the Mangua because my dad's from Mangua, my mom's also from Mangua. So, that was why I had a lot of interest in trying to do research. It seems like most of our stories are tied more into um, upolu. So, it's nothing wrong with that, you know. But you also want to hear about Kukuila. You want to hear about
Yeah.
what's unique about Mangua. And The information is out there. You just have to know where to find the information on these. Yeah.
So we got a question for you, Arlington. Um, is the Cannibal King Tufe'ai story true? Just read about it on Wikipedia. Just wondering if we ever heard the story. It's supposedly took place in Vainoa back in the past.
I this one kind of slips my mind, and if I remember this one correctly, I always get my stories mixed up because the names sound familiar. Is Tuifei the one that's is he the one that's from Malaya Loa that's on the mountain, if I remember?
Okay, I'm from Malailoa, and I don't know, but I'm sure. Yeah, but minority. Can you elaborate? Is it from? You talk about the one that's from Manua or Malailoa? So while we're waiting for that, I think I don't
Okay,
know.
so
Yeah, go ahead.
okay, so there's one of the traditional stories there that is known in Vailoa. Um, and I might share this incorrectly, but it's interesting because there's a name of a village in Vailoa called Kuaulu, right? Kuaulu, and from what I'm told of this story is there is a um, cannibal that lived on like the mountains, kind of like Malailoa area, Aluau. So he climbs
It
up
is
there.
Malailoa. Yeah, that is
Okay,
Malailoa. Sorry, I had to think about it.
yeah. So the story goes that um, that there's a platform in Kuaulu, which is now Wailokai. That's where like his feeding ground was. So they would capture people and they would leave him there, and then he would come down from the mountains, and then that's where he'll take the people, and then he'll take them up there and eat them alive. But the unique thing about the story is you couldn't look at him, so they would walk the person backwards to him, so their back of their head is facing towards him, which hence the name of the village, Kuaulu, Leulu. So at least that's the way I'm told. So that's how that is. The name is associated with the village. So that was the feeding grounds, or at least the area you drop off. They're captured in Vailoa, and then he comes down, and then they take him, and he eats them up there. So
But that
is that the
explains a lot
story
of
you
the
guys are
question.
asking? Oh, but I think the question is it true? Like these are stories that are passed down. It depends on how you want to believe them. So, well, the
I'm
stories
gonna
are out there. We don't say they're true or false. We just acknowledge there are unique stories out there for us to learn about.
I'm gonna read a comment from Julia. Alias Pungo West Samoa, which is a Mormon stake center in America, Samoa, currently hosting a family history exhibition at DWYA all week to the public. Very inspiring to unite communities. So something to look out for those out there in America, Samoa. LDS Pongo West Samoa is currently hosting a family history exhibition at DWYA. So and that's a good way to understand your ngafa and get together to get your genealogy going. Um, right. So, going
Yeah,
back,
thanks for sharing.
yes, yes. So,
Mm-hmm.
Arlington, this is crazy that you mentioned earlier before we started the podcast that this book is going out. It's being sold for about $800, $700. For the book to cost that much, the value is so high that there's a big interest. Can you tell us why?
So there's a resurgence in interest in knowing the truth, but people are tired of buying secondhand stories, right? Because we'll fingau solo sa mua po ara sa ongo o kalaanga mai anga mua. So people say, "Oh, I don't trust that book that guy just wrote in 1980 or 1970 or 1960." People want to return to when the book was originally written or the stories were originally captured from the people of the past. So if you take yourself to the origin, the original source, and then now you can say, I read the original, and I will form my own opinion from the original source. Because, like, if you take Kramer's book and you look at all these subsequent publishings we see today, there's vast difference. And you question, the modern publishers, and you say, where did you get your version from? Did the story change over time by the time it reached you in the 1950s? Now you told the story. Just like how I said, I forgot what the Tuifiai story, and I may have shared it incorrectly. I may remember pieces, but it's likely it wasn't correct the way I explained it. If someone's listening and goes and publish my version, yang ako sa siya ko ya marfamakalanga, then the next generation is taking the wrong version. So it's
Mm.
careful. I always say, please go read the original. So even myself, I can't retain all the stories. So, but like I always have vivid recollections of the different stories in my head. So that's just kind of how I look at things.
What do you think people should? Well, first, before I jump into this other question, how did you come across this book? Because I have never heard about it until you mentioned it the first podcast.
I think for me was I was doing research on my family. I was trying to piece together my family tree post pre-Christianity. I wanted to see what the Christians wrote about my family in the 1830s. Can I take my family tree and go beyond? So that was my work, and I was reading more missionary work, and a lot of the missionary work does cover a lot of information about my family. But then the missionaries were starting to like reference like different stories. And then I came across Thomas Powell's work, and then eventually my brain was like, wow, this is very interesting. And then it led me to Kramers. And then when I got into it was like a one-stop shop for me. I didn't realize the Falupenga was in there. I didn't realize um, the Kalavavau was in there. I didn't even realize all the family trees were in there. I didn't realize the medicine was in there. The images of tattoos and um, the connection to the other islands, the Fiji, Tonga. It's amazing what is captured in this book that it takes you to a time when like the pre-colonial, well, more modernized, before the superpowers divided the islands. At least puts you in their shoes to see what Samoa was like in the early
Mm.
days, because you're not too far removed from when the Christians first arrived.
You know what interests me is that I didn't know because you mentioned it before we started. I had no idea, and they didn't teach us this in high school, that Fiji was a part of Samoa. That it was actually owned and run by I believe the Samoan kings at that time or whatever leaders.
Yeah, so we all understand there's different interpretations depending on what island you go. You go to Tonga, Tonga will say Tonga ruled out of Pacific, and then you go to Samoa and they say the same. You go to Fiji and they say the same. So you don't dismiss each island's story because that's what's unique to them, but we honor what story and tales that are unique to us. We know in Samoa there's an understanding that Tuimanua ruled the Pacific, and part of his rule is called Samoa Atoa. And Samoa Atoa, it engulfs most of the Pacific islands, including Tonga, Fiji, and all the other islands. So there is an understanding that Samoa name is not unique to our islands. Samoa meant a collection of the Pacific islands, extends his kingdom, his power beyond, it was his reach. So that's just one way of looking at it. Is Samoa just unique to what we know today? There's an argument out there. No, Samoa is Samoa Atoa, which means the ruler of the Pacific. There is a philosophy that Tumanua ruled the Pacific, and his rule is called Samoa Atoa. So it's just one argument that's out there.
Mm. Well, so what's one of what was one thing that stood out to you when you first opened the book?
Like for me, is the story of how the tattoo arrived to Kukuila. I love the song. It touches us to our heart because it seems like we are the keepers of the tattoo. We're the ones who kept the tattoos alive when the Christianity arrived. When Christians came, they try to outlaw tattooing. They kill tattooing in Konga. So um, as much as they tried to remove the tattoo in Samoa, it it remained. And if it wasn't for the Samoan people for retaining that, and then now you have this unique story that is kept in our beautiful song, um, the Mafuanga o, you know, o Kaumaile Kakau I Samoa. That song is so beautiful, but it's worth opening Kramer's book and reading that story and then listening to the song. It touches to your heart, and then you see like, oh wow, Kramer captured the origin of this story. And what's unique to me, because I like reading the arguments that we have online between different people and about the tattooing. But just go read Kramer's book. Read what he says, of how this tattoo came to Samoa. But then in the footnotes, if you read in the footnotes, it says what his understanding is. Who are those two girls? Because even Samoa, there's still a disagreement. O le mea o kai mama ki whainga mai ele, the Akwawi Samoa. People will say, no, it's not them. But then Kramer believes it was those two girls. And because Kramer put it in the footnotes, it is what everyone in Samoa believes today. You know, do we blame Kramer for pointing us in that direction and saying it was those two girls because he's the one that wrote it in the footnotes? You know, but then there's a lot of other people in Samoa that say, no, it's not those two girls. So that's what's unique about this is, you be careful by going to the original source who wrote it, and if that's what we live by today. And the kufungas of Angayele le kufunga kakao, the people those are the maintainers of our tattoo. Those are the true ones you go and ask. Ask those guys. They will tell you, you know, what has passed through them. So ask the questions you ask them is, what do you think about Kramer's version? Um, does the Kramer version supplement or is in agreement with what you guys been passing down? And if the Kufunga Kau says Kramer is accurate, then good. Then accept that version. But if they tell a different side, so then that's where you say, oh man, it's unique that the Kufunga Kaus they have a different story. But you have to acknowledge their story too, and a lot of their stories are not published. It's like unknown to many. So it's best to take it from them and
Mm.
um because we consider and argue all day, but those are the keepers of the truth that they know.
This is the kind of book that we need to create a book club with, reading this book and then to debate and talk about. So, with that said, what advice can you give to those who are now interested in wanting to grab a hold of this book that Kramer wrote?
So if you're like me, when I first started with it, I wanted to research online. There has to be a free version, right? There has to be a free version somewhere. So I searched and searched and searched, and I stumbled across there is a free version. So if you keep on searching Google, like do a Google search, eventually you'll come across Augustin Kramer, die insulin. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it correctly. It's the German word, die insulin Samuel. You will eventually come to a link that will take you to the English version, and that's what I usually go to. Um, I don't have it saved here, but I know if I've ever like every time I want to go back and research more on the English version, I just Google it and eventually I'll stumble on it. It's not too hard to find. It just takes you some time in the search bar. Start there. Start there with the online version. It's free. Afapeo malie lo faikau if there's something that you're like, okay, I am interested based on what I've seen so far on this free version, then go and purchase it. But don't just jump into it because it's very expensive. It's like $700 last time I seen for both volumes.
Wow.
I, if you're really a researcher like me, I really wanted a book and I bought it on eBay. I think mine cost like 300 for both of them, something like that.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
like I also said, if I Skuckle book club, if you want to, want me to open a book, we'll do a weekly reading on different segments.
I was just gonna say, if you wanted to do a book club and then everyone subscribes so we can buy the book, all we can put their money together and then we'll start scanning it so that we can read it like on a weekly basis or something. Because honestly, just the stories and the things that you talked about, it just makes me it just I guess pride for within our own people and our culture because that's something that I feel like it's being lost as we continue through our years and changes start to sprout out within our own island. Like, like I mentioned, McDonald's, how that changed our diet, in
Mhm.
American Samoa and all these new things popping up, technology and just the Western type of living, and it's not bad, but at the same time, try not to lose what we used to have within our and that's knowledge of our culture. So
Yeah, and that's kind of why when I released my video on TikTok, my intent was it's unfair for us to have this valuable resource that no one knows about because I know I didn't know about it until did my research and stumbled on it and then decided to buy the book. But I wanted to put that out to the public, like, hey, this information is out there, and I know there's a lot of interest in it, like how I was, and that was what led me to sharing this information. I don't like it that people put these books out there and they entice you knowing how valuable it is to us and they say, okay, how bad do you want it? It's 800 bucks. You know, it's sad what people will do, knowing that we can't afford it and also how valuable it is to us. And now you want to mark it up to a cost that's just so outrageous.
yeah, and don't be surprised that the reason why they also want to increase their prices because the value of your family lineage is actually for majority of most of you, your family lines are probably in that book and you don't even know. And so that's
Mhm.
something very important to pick up. And again, I know that Julia just mentioned, please share the link in regards to the book. And then let's see, the other one is scan the hard copy pages and post it on pop group page for Mone Mone. Okay, so you know what? Anybody wants to chip in? Let's do that, and we'll start posting those PDF files on there. I just
So,
yeah.
yeah, may sisiki look kay may. We would do it legally. We'll do, but yeah. No, I value your opinion. I agree. As much as I want to scan them and put them out there, I also want to respect the rights of the publisher. And
Mm.
yeah, there's some people who publish this secondhand, and they've got all their lawyers who are lawyering up. So we also have to be careful. So if you do get a copy, like, yeah, I agree, it's okay to share, in a book club, but be careful of what you scan because it can come back and I don't know who owns the rights to these books, but it can come back and haunt you if you try to share too much online that you shouldn't.
So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna create a Google Drive account and I'll share my password and login with everybody who wants to be on the book club. What about that, lawyers? Well, I feel like once for those of you out there who are listening in, I think once since this is actually new to so many of us, and it's something very interesting that I know that many of you will want to dive into. And I feel like once we get an understanding by getting our hands on that book, it would be nice to have another segment of Kramer on the podcast because this is something that we can talk about and share with everyone else. Because, like what was mentioned earlier, I think someone mentioned history is very important. Yes, it is. It's so important because as we get older, our younger generation has no idea about the value and the importance of our past and our people. And so that's something that we need to be able to carry on to our next generation. As we come to an end, Arlington, thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to share? I feel like we haven't covered everything, but I know that we just need to, for us, we need to read into it more so we can have more to talk about.
Yeah, when we released our video for the public, I know there's a lot of people who your questions didn't come out, but if you're viewing this later on, please add your comments, and we'll definitely do a follow up. I don't mind going in there and answering some of the questions. Just add it to the comment sections when our book is released. I mean, our video is released. Also, if you go to my original page on my TikTok, so if that's where you learned and brought you to this podcast, you can ask your questions there as well, and then I'll also try to tie that back to the Pulse of Polynesia podcast to answer all those questions.
And by the way, to Arlington's daughter, what's your daughter's name?
Talia. Hmm.
Talia. No, that's right, Talia. Talia, thank you so much for teaching your dad how to use TikTok.
So
I,
yeah, I'm brand new to TikTok. So if you see me on there, yeah, I'm the new guy on the block. So I've only been out for a few weeks, and I didn't even know such a thing existed, and it's
right.
a good community. I'm glad that you guys have welcomed me and found interest in some of the things I share.
Thank you, Arlington. And our sister Eileen, is there anything you would like to say before we close?
No, you guys did great. Thank you.
I just have Eileen on here. I have to force her just to be my supporters.
Mhm.
Also because I wanted her beautiful face on. So I love you, sister. Thank you so much for coming on.
Sure, we
Because
should
she's
have
coming on the
Fui on
backside.
here too.
Mm.
Well, with that said, everybody, to God be all the glory. We love you all. And one more last comment. Mano Lava Pop Squad, pleasure listening in on tonight's discussion. Alafatu. Thank you so much, Julia, and to all of our guests out there. And also, Janet says, gained a lot of great information tonight. Definitely encourages me to do my own research as well. Yes, same here. It's time to get that book open and start digging into research. Um, Right, to everyone out there, appreciate all of you, you guys. You all have a good. Let's see. You all have a good. Okay, you all have a good night. Yes. All right,
Yeah,
to
good night to
everybody
you
out
all as
there.
well.
Good night.
Have a good night. To
Bye.
God be all the glory. Have a good night and a good Sunday as well. Love you all. Night.
Yeah, pass with four.